long before the rise of medieval Europe, and centuries before Rome reached its greatest power. A formidable people dominated the vast grasslands stretching from the Black Sea to Central Asia, the Sarmatians. They were not builders of cities or writers of chronicles. They were nomads, and their world was the open steppe. Emerging around the 5th century BCE, the Sarmatians belonged to the Iranian-speaking nomadic cultures of the Eurasian steppes. Their lives revolved around horses, warfare, and migration. Mobility was survival, strength was law, and skill in battle defined status. Unlike sedentary civilizations, Sarmatian society left few written records. What we know comes from Greek and Roman authors, and from archaeology. Burial mounds scattered across the steppes, filled with weapons, armor, horses, and something that shocked modern historians: women, armed women. The Sarmatians were exceptional, not because they fought wars, but because women fought alongside men, not symbolically, not occasionally, but regularly. This alone made them stand out violently against the norms of the ancient Mediterranean world. To Greek observers, accustomed to rigid gender roles, this was unthinkable. A society where women rode horses, carried bows, and died with weapons in their hands could only be explained one way: myth. And so history blurred into legend. The Sarmatians were not a marginal tribe. They were a dominant military force for centuries, feared by their neighbors and respected by Rome. Their cavalry tactics, mobility, and archery made them nearly unstoppable on open terrain. Understanding who the Sarmatians were is essential because they formed the historical foundation upon which the myth of the Amazons may have been built. Before the Amazons became legend, there were real women on horseback, and they were Sarmatian. The Eurasian steppe was not a place where civilization gently developed. It was a landscape that forged warriors or erased the weak. Endless grasslands, brutal winters, scorching summers, and constant movement defined life for the Sarmatians. In this world, the horse was everything. From early childhood, Sarmatians learned to ride. Mobility meant food, safety, and dominance. A person on foot was vulnerable. A person on horseback was powerful. Warfare, hunting, migration, and identity itself were inseparable from the saddle. The steppe demanded constant readiness for conflict. Resources were limited, borders were fluid, and rival nomadic groups competed for grazing land. War was not an event, it was a condition of life. This environment did not allow strict gender divisions. Survival overruled ideology. Anyone who could ride, shoot, and fight was valuable. This is where Sarmatian society fundamentally diverged from Greek and Roman norms. Women trained for war because the steppe required it. Combat favored speed and precision, not heavy infantry. Sarmatian warriors mastered mounted archery, striking from a distance, retreating, and attacking again. Strength mattered less than endurance, coordination, and skill traits equally achievable by women raised in the same conditions as men. Children grew up surrounded by weapons, horses, and battle stories. Violence was normalized, ritualized, and respected. Death in combat was honorable, regardless of gender. To sedentary civilizations, the steppe appeared chaotic and barbaric. In reality, it was a highly adapted survival system, one that produced some of the most effective warriors of the ancient world. And in that system, women did not watch war from a distance. They were part of it. This harsh environment explains everything that follows. Without the steppe, there are no warrior women. And without warrior women, there are no Amazons. To the ancient Greeks, the Amazons were terrifying and fascinating at the same time. They were described as women who rejected domestic life, lived without men, mastered warfare, and defeated male warriors on the battlefield. In Greek mythology, this was not just unusual, it was unnatural. The Amazons appear repeatedly in Greek sources. In the stories of Heracles, Theseus, and the Trojan War, they are portrayed as fierce archers, expert horsewomen, and enemies worthy of legendary heroes. Importantly, they are never depicted as imaginary monsters. They are human, organized, and militarily competent. That detail matters. Greek myths often exaggerated, but they rarely invented entire societies without some real-world stimulus. When Greeks encountered cultures that challenged their worldview, they filtered reality through myth. The Amazons may not be pure fantasy, but rather a mythologized memory of real warrior women encountered beyond the Greek world. Greek authors consistently placed the Amazons to the east and north of the Black Sea, precisely where Sarmatian and related steppe cultures lived. This geographic overlap is not accidental. For Greek traders, soldiers, and colonists operating around the Black Sea, encounters with nomadic peoples were frequent. Seeing women on horseback, armed with bows, participating in warfare, would have been profoundly destabilizing for Greek society, where women were excluded from combat and public life. Faced with something they could not culturally process, the Greeks did what they always did. They turned it into myth. The Amazons became a symbolic other, a mirror of everything Greek society was not or feared becoming. Powerful women, martial women, independent women, but myths often preserve truth beneath exaggeration. The question is no longer whether the Amazons existed exactly as described. The real question is this: what did the Greeks actually see that forced them to imagine such women at all? When we move beyond myth and look at ancient historical texts, something striking emerges. Greek and Roman authors repeatedly mention real women who fought, not as legends, as observations. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, describes steppe peoples where women rode horses, hunted, and fought alongside men. He even recounts a tradition in which young women were expected to kill an enemy before marriage, a detail that sounds mythical, yet aligns disturbingly well with archaeological evidence. Later authors, such as Hippocrates, Strabo, and Diodorus Siculus, also reference nomadic societies in which women were physically trained and militarily active. These accounts are not poetic epics. They are ethnographic descriptions, written by men trying to make sense of cultures radically different from their own. What unites these sources is not admiration, but unease. Greek writers often framed warrior women as unnatural, excessive, or morally inverted. Their language reveals discomfort more than disbelief. They were not saying this cannot exist, but rather this should not exist. Importantly, these authors did not locate such women in distant fantasy realms. They consistently placed them among Scythians and Sarmatians, peoples the Greeks actually encountered through trade, warfare, and colonization. The famous Amazon traits, archery, horsemanship, light armor, mobility, perfectly match steppe warfare, not Greek infantry combat. This is not coincidence. It is cultural translation. The Greeks filtered foreign reality through familiar narrative structures. A woman who fought became an Amazon. A nomadic warrior society became a mythic kingdom. But beneath the mythological language, the historical signal remains clear. Ancient authors were describing something real and deeply unsettling to their worldview. The Amazons may be myth, but warrior women were not. For centuries, the Amazons were dismissed as myth because there was no proof. Then archaeology spoke. Across the Eurasian steppes, from the Black Sea region to Kazakhstan, archaeologists began uncovering kurgans, burial mounds, belonging to Sarmatian and related cultures. Inside many of them were skeletons buried with weapons, armor, and horses. At first, these graves were automatically labeled male. They weren't. Modern osteological analysis and DNA testing reveal the shock. A significant number of these warriors were women. Not symbolic burials, not ritual objects. Real combat equipment, bows, quivers filled with arrows, spears, swords, daggers, buried with bodies that showed battle injuries. Some female skeletons display healed fractures, arrow wounds, and trauma consistent with mounted warfare. These women were not ceremonial figures. They had fought. They had survived battles. and some had died in them. In certain Sarmatian regions, up to 20 to 30% of warrior graves belong to women. That percentage is too high to be an anomaly. It indicates a social pattern, not an exception. Even more telling is how these women were buried. They received the same funerary honors as male warriors. No signs of shame. No separation. No indication that their role was controversial within their own culture. This is where myth collapses. The archaeological record confirms exactly what Greek authors struggled to describe: a society where women rode, fought, bled, and were honored as warriors. The Amazons did not emerge from imagination. They emerged from misunderstood reality. When archaeology meets myth, one of them has to give way. And in this case, myth is starting to look a lot like memory. Sarmatian women did not become warriors by exception or desperation. They were raised that way. From childhood, life on the steppe demanded skills that erased the line between male and female roles. Girls learned to ride horses almost as soon as they could walk. Riding was not sport or status. It was survival. Daily life unfolded on horseback, herding, hunting, traveling, and defending the group. Skill in the saddle was universal. Training was informal, but relentless. Archery practice began early, using short composite bows perfectly suited for mounted combat. These weapons required strength, coordination, and precision, abilities developed naturally through constant use, not formal drills. Hunting served as preparation for war. It taught tracking, patience, lethal accuracy, and cooperation. A woman who could bring down a moving animal from horseback could do the same to an enemy. Physical conditioning was built into life itself. Long migrations, harsh climates, and scarcity forged endurance. There was no protected domestic sphere. Everyone worked, everyone endured, everyone learned to fight. Marriage customs also reflected this reality. Ancient sources suggest that women were expected to prove martial competence before marriage, sometimes through combat or hunting feats. Whether literal or symbolic, the message is clear: strength was valued. Importantly, Sarmatian women did not abandon femininity to become warriors. They integrated warfare into their identity. Jewelry, tattoos, and clothing found in graves show that martial life and personal expression coexisted. These women were not copying men. They were fulfilling the demands of their world. And that world, harsh, mobile, and violent, had no room for weakness, regardless of gender. Sarmatian warfare was built for the steppe, and it was perfectly suited to women trained from childhood in riding and archery. This was not the world of heavy armor, shields, and tight infantry formations. It was a style of combat where speed, precision, and endurance mattered more than brute strength. The core of Sarmatian combat was mounted archery. Warriors fought on horseback, using powerful composite bows, capable of penetrating armor at distance. They attacked while moving, firing accurately at full gallop, retreating, circling, and striking again. The goal was to exhaust, confuse, and break the enemy before close combat ever began. This method neutralized physical size differences. What mattered was balance, coordination, and timing, skills that Sarmatian women possessed in equal measure. Archaeological finds show female warriors buried with full archery kits, including quivers, arrows, and bow components, identical to those of men. When close combat occurred, Sarmatians used spears, swords, and daggers, often after weakening the enemy with missile fire. Cavalry charges were fast and decisive, designed to finish a battle quickly rather than hold ground. Greek and Roman armies struggled against this style of warfare. Heavy infantry was slow. Formations were vulnerable. The Sarmatian way of fighting felt unpredictable and unfair, a hallmark of steppe warfare. Women fought using the same tactics, the same weapons, and the same risks. There is no evidence of female-only combat roles. They were not auxiliaries or symbolic figures. They were full participants in war. This combat style explains why ancient observers were so disturbed. They were not just seeing women fight. They were seeing women fight better than expected. And that challenged everything the classical world believed about war, power, and gender. Sarmatian society was not egalitarian in a modern sense, but it was pragmatic. Roles were defined by ability, not ideology. Survival on the steppe demanded contribution from everyone. Women were not removed from domestic life. They combined it with warfare. A woman could raise children, manage camps, ride with the group, and fight when needed. These roles were not contradictory. They were complementary. There is no evidence of social stigma attached to female warriors. On the contrary, burial practices show respect and status. Women buried with weapons were not exceptions. They were recognized members of the warrior class. Gender roles among the Sarmatians were flexible because rigidity was dangerous. Any system that limited half the population would fail in the steppe. This is the key difference between Sarmatians and Mediterranean civilizations. Greek society excluded women from war by ideology. Sarmatian society included them by necessity. Ancient sources in archaeology reveal that Sarmatian women were visually striking. They wore practical clothing adapted to riding, trousers, boots, and fitted garments, all shocking to Greek observers accustomed to long robes and seclusion. Tattoos were common, especially among warrior elites. Animal motifs, geometric patterns, and symbols likely carried spiritual and social meaning. These markings reinforced identity and status. Greek writers often described steppe women as tall, physically strong, and confident in posture. These descriptions were not admiration. They were attempts to explain why such women seemed so dangerous. To the Greeks, Sarmatian women looked wrong because they broke every visual marker of femininity their culture recognized. In reality, they simply looked like warriors shaped by their environment. Greek myth exaggerated Sarmatian women in predictable ways. It stripped them of families, turned them into man-haters, and portrayed them as permanently hostile to male society. Archaeology tells a different story. Sarmatian women lived in mixed communities. They married, raised children, and fought when necessary. They were not isolated female societies. That element belongs entirely to myth. The myth of the Amazons reflects Greek fear, not Sarmatian reality. Fear of women with autonomy. Fear of societies that did not mirror Greek norms. The exaggeration served a purpose. It allowed Greeks to frame powerful women as unnatural, distant, and ultimately conquerable by heroes. Myth simplified reality to make it manageable. The Sarmatians did not exist in isolation. They interacted constantly with neighboring cultures through trade, warfare, and migration. They fought and intermingled with Scythians, sharing cultural traits and warfare styles. Greek colonies around the Black Sea encountered them directly, trading goods while recording uneasy observations. Rome faced Sarmatian cavalry on the battlefield and respected them as formidable opponents. In some cases, Sarmatian warriors even served as mercenaries or auxiliaries within Roman forces. These interactions ensured that stories of warrior women spread far beyond the steppe, carried by soldiers, merchants, and diplomats. The myth of the Amazons did not travel through poetry alone. It traveled through contact. The Amazon myth entered Greece gradually, shaped by trade routes and frontier encounters. Greek sailors and merchants operating around the Black Sea encountered steppe societies firsthand. They returned with stories that challenged Greek assumptions about gender and war. Rather than reject these accounts, Greek culture absorbed them, but transformed them. Real women warriors became mythic figures. Complexity became symbolism. By the time the Amazons appeared in epic poetry and art, they were no longer Sarmatian women. They were Greek ideas about foreign power and female transgression. The myth was not imported whole. It was translated. Greek society was deeply patriarchal. Female autonomy threatened its foundations. The existence of women who fought and ruled contradicted the Greek social order. Myth offered a solution by placing warrior women in a distant, semi-fictional world. The Greeks could acknowledge their existence without allowing the concept to challenge their own system. The Amazons became a warning story. Powerful women existed, but they belonged elsewhere, and they were ultimately defeated by male heroes. Over time, the Sarmatians declined as new nomadic groups moved across the steppe. They were absorbed, displaced, or transformed, but their legend survived. The image of women on horseback, bows in hand, continued to circulate long after the Sarmatians themselves disappeared as a distinct people. The Amazons outlived the society that inspired them. The answer is not simple, but it is clear. The Amazons of myth never existed exactly as described, but women warriors absolutely did. Archaeology, ancient sources, and geography converge on the same conclusion. The myth of the Amazons is rooted in real encounters with Sarmatian and steppe women who fought, lived, and died as warriors. The Greeks did not invent the Amazons for nothing. They transformed reality into legend. And in doing so, they preserved a truth they could not fully accept: that long before modern debates about gender, there were societies where women rode into battle, not as symbols, but as warriors.